He had been fixing pianos for rich people for almost 30 years. Every week, he would walk through the back doors of big houses, carry his small bag of tools, and spend hours making sure every key sounded perfect. He knew the smell of those houses. He knew the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. He knew how the help was supposed to act. Quiet, invisible, gone before anyone noticed. But he had never once been invited to stay. That night was supposed to be like any other job. A wealthy woman who lived in one of the biggest mansions in town was throwing her annual charity party. It was the kind of event where people wore suits that cost more than most people earned in a month. The kind of party where waiters carried tiny food on silver plates and everyone smiled even when they didn't mean it. The woman had called him 3 days before the party. Her piano was making a strange sound, she said. A few keys weren't responding the way they should. She needed it fixed before her guests arrived. She needed it perfect. He had said yes, of course. He always said yes. That was how he survived. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that his life had fallen apart just 2 months earlier. His only daughter had passed away after fighting a long illness. She was just 31 years old. For 3 years, he had watched her grow weaker. For 3 years, he had spent every penny he had trying to save her. He sold his car. He sold his small house. He borrowed money from people he barely knew. None of it mattered. She was gone anyway. Now he was living in a tiny room above a laundromat. He had almost nothing left. Just his tools, a few clothes, and the old suit that once belonged to his father. That suit was the only nice thing he still owned. It was dark, gray, a little worn at the edges, but it still looked respectable. His father had worn it to church every Sunday for 20 years. On the night of the party, he put on that suit. He didn't know why. Maybe he just wanted to feel like a human being again, not just a man who came and went through service doors. Maybe he wanted to remember his father, who had dreamed of a better life but never got to live it. He arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the big house looked like something from a movie. Cars were lined up along the driveway. Men in fancy coats and women in glittering dresses were walking toward the front entrance, laughing and greeting each other like old friends. He walked around to the back, like he always did. The kitchen was chaos. Waiters rushed past him carrying trays. Cooks shouted orders. Nobody looked at him twice. He made his way through the noise and found his way to the main ballroom, where the grand piano sat in the corner, waiting for him. It was a beautiful instrument. A Steinway, black and shining, worth more than everything he had ever owned combined. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys, listening, feeling. Within minutes, he understood the problem. A few hammers needed adjusting. Nothing serious. He opened his bag and got to work. For the next hour, he tuned that piano with the same care he had given to every piano for the past 3 decades. His hands moved slowly, precisely. He listened to each note, adjusted each string, tested each key until the sound was pure and clean. When he was finished, he closed the lid gently and stood up. The ballroom had started to fill with guests. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above. A soft melody played from hidden speakers. People gathered in small groups, holding glasses of champagne, talking about things he would never understand. Investments, vacations, in places he had never seen. Problems that weren't really problems at all. He was about to leave when it happened. A young waiter, barely 20 years old, walked up to him with a tray of champagne glasses. The waiter smiled and offered him a drink. He almost said no. He almost explained that he was just the piano tuner, that he didn't belong here, that he should be heading out the back door. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the waiter looked at him, like he was a guest, like he was someone who mattered. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the past few months, the loneliness that had settled into his bones like a cold that wouldn't go away. Maybe it was the memory of his daughter, who used to tell him that he deserved more than he allowed himself to have. He took the glass. The waiter nodded politely and moved on to the next group. And just like that, He was standing in the middle of the party, holding a glass of champagne, wearing his father's old suit, pretending to be someone he wasn't. His heart was beating fast. He expected someone to stop him at any moment. He expected someone to point at him and say, "What are you doing here? You don't belong." But no one did. People glanced at him and looked away. Some even nodded politely. To them, he was just another guest. A quiet older man in a gray suit. Probably some retired businessman or a distant relative of the host. Nobody questioned him. Nobody looked too closely. For the first time in 30 years, he was invisible in a different way. Not invisible like the help. Invisible like someone who belonged. He walked slowly through the room, staying close to the walls, watching. He saw how people laughed too loud and smiled too wide. He saw how they touched each other's arms while they talked, leaning in like they were sharing secrets. He saw how some of them looked bored even while they smiled, their eyes wandering around the room, searching for someone more important to talk to. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't know what to say. But just being there, just standing among them, felt like something he had never experienced before. It felt like freedom. It felt like he was finally allowed to exist in the same space as everyone else. He found a quiet corner near the window and stood there, sipping his champagne slowly. Outside, the night had turned dark. The garden was lit with small golden lights, and he could see couples walking along the stone paths, their voices soft and distant. He thought about his daughter. She would have loved to see him like this. She used to tease him about how he never allowed himself any joy, how he always put everyone else first, how he worked and never stopped to breathe. "You deserve good things too, Papa," she used to say. "Why do you always forget that?" He never had an answer. Now, standing in that beautiful room, surrounded by strangers who didn't know his name, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt almost peaceful, almost like the weight on his chest had lifted, just for a moment. But that moment wouldn't last, because across the room, a man was watching him. A man with cold eyes and a sharp smile. A man who knew exactly who he was. And that man was already walking toward him. The man walking toward him was tall and well-dressed. His suit was perfectly tailored, the kind that was made just for him by someone who measured every inch. His shoes were polished so bright they reflected the chandelier lights. He held his champagne glass loosely, like it meant nothing to him. Like everything in this room meant nothing to him, because he already owned it all. He recognized the man immediately. It was the son of one of his oldest clients. For over 20 years, he had tuned the piano at this family's estate. He had watched this man grow from a spoiled teenager into a spoiled adult. He had heard the way he spoke to the housekeepers, the drivers, the gardeners, always looking down, always making sure everyone knew their place. And now, that man was walking straight toward him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He felt his stomach tighten. He thought about putting down his glass and walking away. He could slip out through the kitchen, the same way he came in. Nobody would notice. Nobody would care. But before he could move, the man was already standing in front of him. "Well, well," the man said, his voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I thought I recognized that face." He didn't respond. He just stood there, holding his glass, trying to keep his expression calm. The man tilted his head, pretending to think. "Where do I know you from? Let me guess. Are you a banker? A lawyer? Some kind of consultant?" A few people nearby had stopped talking. They were watching now, curious about what was happening. He cleared his throat. "I don't think we've met formally," he said quietly, hoping the man would let it go. But the man laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh, the kind that had no warmth in it. "Oh, we've met," the man said. "Many times. You just don't remember because you always come through the back door." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. More people were looking now. The small groups nearby had gone quiet. Even the soft music seemed to fade into the background. The man turned to the crowd, spreading his arms like he was about to tell a great joke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to introduce our special guest tonight. This man has been in and out of our homes for years. He knows every piano in this neighborhood better than we do." Someone in the crowd chuckled nervously. "He's not a guest," the man continued, his smile growing wider. "He's the piano tuner. He's the piano tuner." The room seemed to freeze. He felt the heat rising to his face. His hands started to tremble slightly, so he gripped his glass tighter to hide it. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. A woman nearby whispered something to her husband. Someone else let out a small laugh. Not everyone was cruel, but the ones who were made sure their voices were heard. "I have to say," the man went on, clearly enjoying himself, "this is impressive. The help pretending to be one of us. That takes courage. Or maybe just a lot of confusion. More laughter now. Not loud, but enough. Enough to make him feel like he was shrinking, like he was becoming smaller and smaller with every passing second." He thought about his daughter again. He thought about how she always told him to stand up for himself, how she hated when people treated him like he was less than them, how she would get angry on his behalf when he refused to get angry for himself. "You deserve respect, Papa," she used to say. "Why do you let people walk over you?" But he never knew how to fight back. He had spent his whole life being quiet, being polite, being invisible. That was how he survived. That was how people like him always survived. The man took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound friendly, even though everyone could still hear. "Tell me something," he said. "Do you even know how to play? Or do you just press the keys to check if they're working?" This time, the laughter was louder. He looked around the room. Some people had turned away, embarrassed. Others were watching with that look he knew so well. The look of people who were grateful they weren't the one being humiliated. He set his champagne glass down on the nearest table. His hand was steadier now. The shame was still there, burning in his chest. But something else was rising alongside it, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I should go," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Yes, you probably should," the man replied, still smiling. "The kitchen is that way, in case you forgot." A few more chuckles. He turned and started walking toward the door. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor. He could feel the eyes on his back, dozens of them, watching him leave like he was a stray animal that had wandered into the wrong house. But then, something happened. He passed the piano. The same piano he had just spent an hour tuning. The same piano he had touched with more care than most of these people touched anything in their lives. It sat there, beautiful and silent, waiting for someone to bring it to life. He stopped. He didn't know why. His body just stopped moving. Like his feet had made a decision, before his mind could catch up. He stood there, staring at the piano, remembering. He remembered his father, who had taught him to play before he even learned to read. His father had been a musician back in their home country, a man who had performed in concert halls and dreamed of playing for kings. But when they came to this country, those dreams faded. There was no room for dreams when you had to work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. His father had passed that love of music to him. Every night after work, no matter how tired they were, they would sit together at a small, beaten-up piano and play. Just the two of them. No audience, no applause, just the music. "This is who we are," his father used to say. "They can take everything from us, but they can't take this." He remembered his daughter too. When she was a little girl, she would sit on his lap while he played. She would press random keys and giggle when the notes clashed. As she grew older, she would sit beside him and listen quietly, her head resting on his shoulder. "Play the sad one, Papa," she would say. "The one that makes you cry." He always played it for her. And sometimes, he did cry. But it never felt bad. It felt like letting go of something heavy. like breathing out after holding your breath for too long. She had believed in him. More than anyone else in the world, she had believed in him. "You could have been great, Papa," she told him once, near the end. "You still could be. Why do you hide the most beautiful part of yourself?" He never had an answer for her. But now, standing in the middle of that ballroom, surrounded by people who saw him as nothing, he finally understood. He had been hiding his whole life, hiding behind his work, hiding behind his silence, hiding behind the fear of being seen. And what had it gotten him? Nothing. His daughter was gone. His money was gone. His pride had been stripped away in front of a room full of strangers. He had nothing left to lose. He turned around. The crowd was still watching him, waiting for him to leave. The man who had humiliated him was laughing with someone nearby. Already moving on, already forgetting about the small man in the old gray suit. But he wasn't leaving. He walked back toward the piano. His steps were slow but steady. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. People started to notice. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. He reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. Then, without saying a word, he pulled out the bench and sat down. The room went completely silent. He placed his fingers on the keys, and for the first time in over 40 years, he prepared to play for an audience. The room was so quiet he could hear his own breathing. He sat at the piano with his hands resting on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath his fingertips. His heart was racing. His palms were damp. Every pair of eyes in that ballroom was fixed on him, waiting to see what he would do next. The man who had mocked him stood near the bar, arms crossed, a smirk still playing on his lips. He clearly expected a disaster. He expected the old piano tuner to embarrass himself even further, to stumble through a few clumsy notes before giving up and running away. That's what everyone expected. But they didn't know him. They didn't know where he came from. They didn't know what music meant to him. He closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. For a moment, he wasn't in that ballroom anymore. He was back in his father's tiny apartment, sitting on a wooden bench that wobbled every time he moved. The piano in that apartment was old and out of tune, with chipped keys and a crack running down one side. But to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. His father would sit beside him, guiding his small hands across the keys. He was patient, always patient. He never raised his voice, never got frustrated, even when his son hit the wrong notes over and over again. "Music is not about being perfect," his father used to say. "It is about being honest. You play what you feel. That is all." He remembered the first time he played a song all the way through without stopping. He was 7 years old. It was a simple piece, just a few chords and a melody, but when he finished, his father had tears in his eyes. "You have the gift," his father told him. "Promise me you will never waste it." He had promised, but life had other plans. When his father got sick, he had to drop out of school and find work. When his father died, he had to take care of his mother. When his mother passed, he was already in his 30s, already stuck in a life that left no room for dreams. He tuned pianos because it kept him close to the music, even if he never got to play. And then his daughter came along, and everything changed. She was the light of his life. From the moment she was born, he knew he would do anything for her. He worked extra hours, saved every penny, made sure she had everything he never had. He wanted her to chase her dreams, even if he had given up on his own. But she saw through him. She always did. "Why don't you play anymore, Papa?" she asked him once, when she was about 12. He had shrugged. "I'm too old. My fingers are stiff. It's been too long." She didn't believe him. She never believed his excuses. As she got older, she would ask him again and again. She would sit beside him when he worked on other people's pianos and watch his hands move with such care, such precision. "You love it," she said. "I can see it in your face. Why won't you just play?" He always changed the subject. He always found a way to avoid the question. The truth was, he was afraid. Afraid that he had lost it, afraid that if he tried to play and failed, he would lose the only piece of himself that still felt special. So he kept his music locked away, hidden in a place no one could reach, not even himself. But now, sitting at this grand piano in front of all these strangers, he realized something. His daughter was right. She had always been right. He had wasted so many years being afraid. So many years hiding. And for what? To avoid embarrassment? To protect himself from judgment? His daughter was gone now. The one person who truly believed in him was no longer there to believe. And in this moment, surrounded by people who looked down on him, he understood that fear didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. Except the music. He opened his eyes and looked down at the keys. His fingers knew exactly where to go. They remembered. Even after all these years, he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. A gentle melody that floated through the air like a whisper. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect. But then, the music grew. His fingers moved faster, pressing deeper into the keys. The melody became richer, more complex. Layers of sound built on top of each other, filling the room with something powerful and alive. He was playing a piece his father had taught him long ago, a classical composition that required years of training to master. It was the kind of music that concert pianists spent their whole lives perfecting, the kind of music that demanded everything from the person playing it, and he gave everything. His hands danced across the keyboard, moving with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for a man his age. The notes poured out of him like water breaking through a dam, unstoppable, overwhelming. He didn't think about the audience. He didn't think about the man who had mocked him. He didn't think about the years of silence, the fear, the hiding. He thought about his father, teaching him to play in that tiny apartment. He thought about his daughter, resting her head on his shoulder while he played. He thought about all the love he had carried inside him, all the pain, all the loss, and he let it out. The music swelled, rising higher and higher. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. It was joy and sorrow, hope and grief, all woven together into something that couldn't be described with words. The guests stood frozen. No one moved. No one whispered. No one even seemed to breathe. The woman who owned the mansion had stopped near the front of the crowd. Her hand was pressed against her chest, and tears were streaming down her face. She had heard many pianists in her life. Famous ones, celebrated ones, but she had never heard anything like this. Near the bar, the man who had humiliated him stood completely still. The smirk was gone from his face. His arms had dropped to his sides. He stared at the piano like he was seeing something he couldn't understand. The music continued, building toward its peak. The notes came faster, louder, filling every corner of the room. The chandeliers seemed to tremble. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and then, slowly, the music began to soften. The storm faded into calm. The fast, powerful notes gave way to something gentle and tender. A quiet melody, simple and pure, like a lullaby sung to a sleeping child. He thought of his daughter in her final days. He thought of sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, not knowing what to say. He thought of the last time she smiled at him, weak, but still, full of love. "Play for me, Papa," she had whispered. One more time. He had played for her that night, just the two of them, in that small hospital room. No audience, no applause, just a father and his daughter, sharing something that words could never capture. She had closed her eyes and listened. And when the song was over, she had squeezed his hand. "That was beautiful," she said. "You're beautiful, Papa. Don't ever forget that." 2 days later, she was gone. Now, in this ballroom full of strangers, he played the same melody he had played for her that night. The same gentle notes. The same quiet love. And when the final note faded into silence, he kept his eyes closed for a long moment. Then he lifted his hands from the keys, and the room exploded. The applause came like thunder. It started with one person, a woman near the front, the one who had been crying. She brought her hands together once, twice, and then she couldn't stop. Others joined her. Then more. Then everyone. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was filled with the sound of clapping. People rose from their seats. Those who were already standing straightened their backs and clapped harder. The noise echoed off the walls, bounced off the chandeliers, filled every inch of the grand room. He sat frozen at the piano, his hands still hovering above the keys. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to react. For so many years, he had played alone, in empty rooms, with no one to hear. He had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Slowly, he turned around on the bench and looked at the crowd. They were all on their feet. Every single one of them. Men in expensive suits. Women in glittering dresses. Waiters who had stopped in the middle of the room. Trays still in their hands. Everyone was standing. Everyone was clapping. And many of them were crying. He saw tears on faces he didn't recognize. He saw people wiping their eyes, trying to hide their emotion but failing. He saw others making no effort to hide at all, letting the tears fall freely down their cheeks. He didn't understand. He had just played a song. That was all. Just a song. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had poured everything into that music. Every memory. Every loss. Every moment of love and pain he had carried for 62 years. He had given them something real. Something honest. Something that money could never buy. And they had felt it. The woman who owned the mansion pushed through the crowd and walked toward him. Her makeup was ruined from crying, but she didn't seem to care. She stopped a few feet away from the piano and just stood there, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "All these years. You've been coming to my home. You've been tuning my piano. And I never knew. I never even asked." He didn't know what to say. He just looked at her. "Why?" she asked. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why did you keep this hidden?" He thought about the question. It was the same question his daughter had asked him so many times. And for the first time, he had an answer. "Because I was afraid," he said quietly. "I was afraid that if I tried and failed, I would lose the only thing that made me feel alive. So I kept it safe. I kept it hidden. I played only for myself and for the people I loved." The woman shook her head slowly. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she said. "And also, the most beautiful." She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was warm and firm. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for sharing that with us tonight. I will never forget it." "Rum, rum, rum." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The applause had finally started to fade, but people were still watching him. Some approached him carefully, like they were approaching something sacred. They shook his hand. They thanked him. They told him things he had never expected to hear. "That was the most moving performance I've ever witnessed," said an older man with silver hair. "You made me think of my mother," said a young woman, her eyes red from crying. "She passed away last year. I haven't cried for her until now." "Where did you study?" asked another man. "Which conservatory? Who was your teacher?" He almost laughed at that one. "My father," he said simply. "He taught me in our apartment when I was a boy. I never went to any school." The man stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. That piece you played requires years of formal training." "My father believed that music comes from the heart," he replied. "He said if you feel it deeply enough, your hands will find a way." More people came. More handshakes. More tears. More words of gratitude and amazement. But through it all, he kept looking for one face. The man who had humiliated him. The man with the cold eyes and the sharp smile. He wanted to see his reaction. He wanted to know if anything had changed. He found him near the bar. Exactly where he had been before, but everything about him was different now. The man was sitting alone on a bar stool, staring at the glass in his hand. The arrogance was gone from his posture. The cruelty was gone from his expression. He looked smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the room. Then the man stood up. He set his glass down on the bar and walked slowly toward the piano. The crowd parted to let him through, and the room grew quiet again. He stopped a few feet away. His jaw was tight. His eyes were unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something cruel again, something to tear down what had just happened. But he didn't. Instead, he lowered his head. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "What I said earlier was wrong. It was cruel and unnecessary. And I'm sorry." The room held its breath. He looked at the man who had mocked him just minutes ago. He saw something in his eyes that he hadn't seen before. Not just shame, but something deeper. Something like recognition. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who have everything," the man continued. "Money, status, power. But I've never seen anyone with what you have. I don't even know what to call it. Soul, maybe. Or heart." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've never felt anything the way I felt that music," he admitted. "It made me realize that I've been empty for a long time, and I've been filling that emptiness by making other people feel small." He looked up, meeting the older man's eyes, directly. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know. I needed you to know." The ballroom was completely silent. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. He looked at this man who had tried to humiliate him. He thought about all the times in his life when people had looked down on him, dismissed him, treated him like he didn't matter. He thought about how easy it would be to hold on to that anger, to let it harden into bitterness. But then he thought about his daughter. She had never held grudges. Even when people hurt her, she found a way to forgive. She used to tell him that anger was like carrying a heavy stone everywhere you went. The only person it hurt was yourself. "You don't need to carry that weight," she would say. "Let it go, Papa. Let it go." He took a deep breath. Then he reached out and offered his hand. The man stared at it for a moment, surprised. Then, slowly, he took it. They shook hands. Two men, who had been strangers just hours ago, connected now by something neither of them fully understood. The room exhaled. A few people clapped softly. Others just watched in silence, moved by what they had witnessed. The woman who owned the mansion stepped forward again. She was smiling now. A real smile. Warm and genuine. "I think," she said, "this calls for another performance. If you're willing." He looked at the piano. He looked at all the faces watching him. He thought about his father. He thought about his daughter. And for the first time in 40 years, he smiled. "I'd like that," he said. And he sat down to play once more. He played 3 more songs that night. Each one was different. The first was bright and joyful, the kind of music that made people tap their feet and smile without knowing why. The second was soft and dreamy, like watching the sun set over a quiet lake. The third was powerful and dramatic, full of passion and fire. With every note, he felt something inside him coming back to life. Something that had been asleep for decades. Something he thought he had lost forever. When he finally lifted his hands from the keys, the applause was even louder than before. People cheered. They called out for more. Some of them had tears in their eyes, again. But he was tired now. A good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you've given everything you have. He stood up from the bench and gave a small bow, the same bow his father had taught him when he was just a boy. Then he walked away from the piano, through the crowd of smiling faces, toward the door. But he didn't make it far. People kept stopping him. They wanted to shake his hand. They wanted to thank him. They wanted to give him their business cards, their phone numbers, They're invitations to play at other events. We're hosting a gala next month, said one woman. Please say you'll come. My husband runs a concert hall downtown, said another. He would love to meet you. I'm a music producer, said a young man in a stylish suit. We should talk. Seriously. He listened politely to all of them. He took their cards. He nodded and smiled. But inside, he felt overwhelmed. This was all happening too fast. Just a few hours ago, he had been invisible. Now suddenly everyone wanted a piece of him. He finally made it to the edge of the room, near the tall windows that looked out over the garden. He needed a moment to breathe, a moment to think. The woman who owned the mansion found him there a few minutes later. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne. She offered one to him, and this time, he took it without hesitation. How are you feeling? She asked. He thought about the question. I don't know, he admitted. I feel like I'm dreaming. Like I'm going to wake up any minute, and none of this will be real. She smiled gently. It's real, she said. Trust me. I've been throwing these parties for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened tonight. You changed something in this room. I don't know how else to explain it. He looked out at the garden. The small golden lights were still glowing along the paths. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Can I ask you something? She said. He nodded. All those times you came to tune my piano, she said slowly. Did you ever play it? When no one was around? He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, just a little. Sometimes, he admitted. When everyone was out, when the house was empty, I would sit down and play for a few minutes, just to hear how it sounded. She shook her head in wonder. I wish I had known. I wish I had heard you. You heard me tonight, he said. Yes, she agreed. I did, and I'll never forget it. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the night. After a while, she spoke again. What will you do now? All those people who gave you their cards, all those offers. Will you take them? He had been asking himself the same question. A week ago, he had nothing. No money. No hope. No reason to keep going. Now, suddenly, he had options. Possibilities. A future he hadn't dared to imagine. But something didn't feel right about it. I don't know, he said honestly. This was never about fame or money for me. I didn't play tonight to impress anyone. I played because... He paused, searching for the words. Because I needed to. Because my daughter would have wanted me to. Because I was tired of hiding. The woman nodded slowly. That makes sense, she said. But maybe there's a way to share your gift without losing what makes it special. Maybe there's something in between. Axlas. He thought about that. And then, suddenly, he knew. The children's hospital. His daughter had spent her final months there. The nurses had been kind. The doctors had done everything they could. But what he remembered most was the children. The little ones fighting their own battles, stuck in beds, missing their homes, missing their normal lives. He remembered walking past the common room one afternoon and seeing a group of them gathered around an old keyboard. One of the nurses was trying to play a simple song, but she kept hitting the wrong notes. The children laughed, but not in a mean way. They were just happy to have something to smile about. His daughter had noticed him watching. You should play for them, Papa, she had said. They would love it. He had shaken his head. I'm not good enough, he told her. She had looked at him with those wise, tired eyes. You're always good enough, she said. You just don't believe it. He never did play for those children. He had been too afraid, too stuck in his own head. But now, standing in this beautiful mansion, surrounded by wealthy people who wanted to put him on a stage, he realized what he truly wanted. He didn't want concert halls. He didn't want fame. He didn't want to perform for people who would forget him by next week. He wanted to play for the children. He wanted to give them what his daughter never got to see. He wanted to honor her memory in the only way that felt right. The next morning, he called the hospital. He explained who he was. He told them about his daughter. He asked if they would let him come in, once a week, to play the piano for the young patients. The woman on the phone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We would be honored." And so it began. Every Tuesday evening, he would walk through the front doors of that hospital with his father's old suit and his heart full of music. He would sit down at the piano in the common room, and he would play. The children loved him. They requested songs. They clapped along. They asked him questions about the piano, about his life, about his daughter. He told them stories. He made them laugh. He held their hands when they were scared. Some of the parents cried when they heard him play. Word spread about the old man who played at the hospital. Newspaper reporters came to interview him. A local television station did a story. People called him an inspiration, a hero, a gift. He didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was the music, and the children, and the memory of his daughter, who had believed in him when no one else did. 8 years later, his hands finally grew too stiff to play. Arthritis had taken away what time had spared. On his last Tuesday at the hospital, he played one final song, the same gentle melody he had played for his daughter on her last night. When he finished, the room was silent. Then, a little girl, in a wheelchair, rolled up to him and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He looked at her, this small, brave child with bright eyes and a beautiful smile. "No," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank you, all of you. You gave me a reason to keep going." He walked out of that hospital for the last time, tears streaming down his face. But for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy, because he had finally stopped hiding, and he had found exactly where he was meant to be.